what's up, everybody? This is Grant, that cause artist. Welcome to another episode of the Disruptors for Good podcast. Today, we have a really special guest, Constantijn Van Oranje, who has done many things with his life, has many titles, and I will try to run through a few of them before we get started. Constantijn is a member of the Dutch royal family. He has a law degree. He's worked for the European Commission, the RAND Corporation, the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's also the co-founder of Startup Fest Europe. He's also a member of the National Growth Fund Assessment Committee, as well as the chairman of the advisory board of the SIDN Fund. He was also in a group of 15 independent members that advised the European Commission on innovation and entrepreneurship, which eventually led to a really interesting fund that was created to invest in startups, which we touch on a little bit. It's some really interesting stuff. He and his wife, Princess Laurentine, also founded the Number 5 Foundation with the goal of connecting people who are committed to innovation that contribute to a just and sustainable society. I have barely tapped into what he has accomplished in his life so far, so I apologize for not getting into it all, but I really want to get into the conversation that we have. It mostly relates to startups here in the Netherlands, how he and TechLeap are working with governments, with the private sector, trying to form this beautiful dance between the private sector and the public sector to get more capital into startups, into innovation around the Netherlands, and look at how to scale businesses, frankly, like American companies. You really take that philosophy and those principles of scale and innovation into an ecosystem here in the Netherlands that can create impactful startups, unicorns that really impact the world in a lot of different areas. We touch on healthcare, food and agriculture. The e-bike revolution here in specifically where I am in Amsterdam is huge. I mean, it's an amazing transformation of transportation that's sort of taking place here, and that is going to be scaling around the world. It's going to be massive in America. Well, a startup that has come out of Amsterdam is scaling to America currently as we speak. So you will see a lot more e-bikes, I believe, in America very soon. So if you like topics around startups and public and private partnerships and how they can work together to innovate cities and countries around the world, you'll love this conversation. I really hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk soon. Thanks. Well, thanks so much, Constantijn, for joining me today. It's been a fun journey for me to come to the Netherlands and kind of discover the startup ecosystem here and what founders and funders are sort of talking about and being involved in sort of the startup ecosystem. It's really fascinating what's going on here. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about your journey first and how maybe you fell upon startups and kind of your journey into maybe not falling in love with startups. That's a little bit romantic, but the idea that using startups to invigorate and innovate, cities and the country and maybe, the Europe as a whole, and how startups can sort of do that. So walk us through a little bit of your journey of how you, got to really like, the startup ecosystem and why you decided to dedicate a lot of your time and maybe life to it.
Well, it's actually a very graduate story. I did an MBA and I went to Busan and Hamilton and then did a bunch of work around actually all this kind of digital developments, whatever. And we did a comparative research for the World Economic Forum on, are countries ready in digitization and how far they were. And then I joined the RAND Corporation, and then eventually I got to lead their informatics economics policy team. So we were doing a ton of work for the European Commission on the impact of digital for, on all kinds of domains. So I was kind of gradual, and then I became the chief of staff of the vice president of the European Commission on digital matters. Mm-hmm. And then this was 2010, and there wasn't a lot of understanding about what digital was, and we were preaching that this is kind of a horizontal technology, but everybody basically were putting us in verticals. So you got transportation, you got energy, and then there's this ICT thing, and it was mostly telecoms. Whereas we said, no, this is actually transformational, and if we don't kind of pick up the pace in Europe, then we're going to come behind. And we didn't really get our message across very well with policymakers, and we started looking for ambassadors. And quite rapidly, we found tech startups as our kind of natural allies. And you'd find them in any space, in healthcare or in education, and then but also general space, obviously in enterprise software and stuff. And they were transforming things. They were actually the vanguard of where things were heading. And we felt that, we didn't have the Apples and the Googles that America had. And we didn't believe it was something that you, as a government, need to kind of try to force down, but we need to kind of create an environment where more of these entrepreneurs could emerge. And so we basically set out, and this was my boss at the time, Nelly Cruz, who went to all the events from Le Web or Picnic or Campus Party, were the events at the time, to go and speak to entrepreneurs and listen to them basically. Well, what is it you need? So, and we set up the Digital Leaders Club with Daniel Ek and Niklas Zenström and the founders of Rovio, the Angry Birds, and more, Martha Lane Fox in the UK. Basically, to have a group of people that could actually be role models and show, this is, you can actually make it big in Europe, and to come up with a list of areas that we could develop as policymakers to create a better space for entrepreneurs. So that's basically how it started. And then when I was done at the European Commission, I really wanted to work with entrepreneurs because they have much more of a kind of can-do mentality, whereas our, the policy-making space is more about, stopping people from doing stuff. I feel sometimes, if you want to change things, you don't always get all the enthusiasts on your side. So, and I felt I was getting really good at trying to work my way around negative energy.
Sure.
And so, and I set up Startup Fest, which was just an idea, and I developed that with a kind of a co-founder, Mr. Jim Stolze here in the Netherlands, and finally it just kind of all worked out as a kind of a festival. Within 1 week, we had 36,000 people joining in 16 locations at over 30 events, and we had Tim Cook and Travis Kalanick and all a lot of big hitters in tech coming over, and so it was like a bit of a surprise, like and people were saying, what are these guys doing in the Netherlands, and we really wanted to kickstart this startup idea, which as a different way of doing business, a different way of innovating across the Netherlands. So in all these different domains, and then I was asked to become envoy of startups in the Netherlands by the government, and they kind of basically took off from there. So that's the long version of
No, and it seems like TechLeap is the natural maturation of all those things. Now there's kind of this digital hub, right? And
we don't want to replace anything that's happening in the market, right? So events, we don't want to do events just there are tech events. We've got the next web, and we have many other events. So we do very targeted things, or we would do in the margin of, for instance, a slush conference. We would kind of bring really organize a dinner only with founders and investors, and make it more curated. We don't want to sit in on the chair of entrepreneurs that are actually doing stuff in this space. So we really want to add value, and if we feel that the market is picking up, that specific function, we will retreat. But for what is really important is that we gather a lot of data, so we understand much better what's happening in the ecosystem, so we can actually talk to the government at a higher level of sophistication, and make more systemic change happen. So that's one part. The other part is that we're seeing that a lot of our actually relatively successful entrepreneurs still do not get the kind of access that they would have if they would be in Silicon Valley, or if they'd be in some, maybe in London. So providing a selected group of startups, and at the end of our tenure, it will be about probably something like 200, maybe 300 scale-ups that we would have directly supported, giving them access, giving them support in a critical phase of their existence, between 40 and 100 employees when they're really scaling up. So we're doing these kind of interventions, and then, but also with universities helping to professionalize the whole tech transfer system, which is still relatively university-centric and science-centric instead of entrepreneur-centric, and to making that transition happen, that's something that we are also very active in.
When you mention access, do you mean specifically access to capital or access to mentorship? Is it just all-around access to what American ecosystems have?
Capital is obviously very important, and also doing that in a strategic way. We find that quite a number of our startups have in their early years gathered capital without a plan, and they might have a cap table which actually stops them from progressing in later stages. So the earlier on companies are get more strategic about who they work with, also on the funding side, the better it is. Dutch entrepreneurs typically are quite insular and quite transactional. So they will just go at it alone, and then maybe turn to investors once they need money, instead of doing it when they don't need money, which means that they're in a much better negotiating position. But yeah, access to capital, but also I think, which may be even more important, is access to critical, well-intended critical feedback. So it's not, it's in a constructive way, but it can be very tough. And we need to be much tougher with our entrepreneurs, because we tend to kind of cheer them on and then let them make their own mistakes, and then which they could have been easily avoided if somebody would just told them much earlier on, so where's your market? How big do you think your market is? What sales capacity are you building? Looking at your organization, are you organizing yourself for growth? How diverse is your team? All these kind of questions that are pretty obvious, and that but if you're a founder and you're building something, you might be too focused on your product, or you might be too focused on purpose or on something, and you're just missing out on some of those easy things that are there that people can just tell you, if long as they can hold a mirror up. And but we don't have the proverbial Starbucks around the corner where you bump into your angel investor, or your mentor or your advisor, and so a bit of being the proverbial Palo Alto Starbucks around the corner is also a function that we try to fill in.
Well, we mentioned a little bit about government earlier, and policies, I think, really important for businesses to really understand what's available to them, or maybe what's not available, and how to make policy better towards startups. And I had listened to the episode with you and Joe with Taco from Van Mouth, and he was mentioning something about hiring. Around sort of getting really, really talented people into startups is a bit difficult, maybe in the Netherlands, because there was something around they couldn't offer equity or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he mentioned about it, but in a policy area or arena, what can be done or is being done maybe to make startups much more easily access talent, maybe from globally, right? Not just the Netherlands, but just in general.
So there are a number of things you can do. Obviously, one is your visa requirements and who you can actually attract to the Netherlands. And we have a startup visa, but it's only for the founder, which is useless, because you want to bring your team, or you want to bring your partner. So we've kind of extended that, but it's all incremental. So grown that now, you can bring the critical team members over as well. You can actually bring, and this is the latest extension of this regulation, is that you can actually bring critical staff over at quite a low salary rate, as long as you give them up to 1% equity. So this is for really critical hires in your company that you want to attract from abroad. That's now enabled. So I think then there is the whole topic of stock options, and how generous the founders are and the investors. I think there's a big story around the investors actually pushing founders to reserve equity for their staff, and for supporting that kind of co-ownership, because not all entrepreneurs are that generous. Then there is the whole fiscal side, that it's not fiscally not that attractive in the Netherlands to give options, because it's treated as a salary. So you basically get income tax over it, and you're taxed at the moment that you actually receive the options, where you don't typically have the money, the liquidity to actually pay the taxes, which is a ridiculous situation. So that situation we're now solving. The moment where you pay your tax, and that make that you can basically choose to the moment that you actually get the options, or at the moment that the shares are liquid, but because there's an exit or there's a secondary or something. That's like a first step. And now we need to go into, is this capital gains or is this income? And our tax authorities really want to keep it as income tax, and we say no, it's not the same as salary, because there's a high risk it will never pay out. And why, if you are the owner of the company, it is actually treated as capital, and that if you get shares as a salary component, why would that not be capital? Why would the investor pay capital gains and the owner, but the employee not? And that's kind of an unfair situation. And we're trying to tell the tax authority that this is not just fiscal policy, but this is human capital policy. This is trying to to attract the best and brightest to the Netherlands, and we have to have a competitive fiscal treatment of stock options.
Do you think it benefits the Netherlands that it's sort of a much smaller country, that you can work with the government maybe much easier on policy changes and shifts where good ideas can actually get brought to fruition in policy much quicker than it could maybe, in a France and a Germany, in Italy, much bigger countries where it goes through, I imagine it might go through a couple more iterations, a couple more people have to approve certain things.
I don't know if size is an issue. It's definitely, if you look at Estonia or Luxembourg, smaller countries, that it's easier to connect with leaders in anything, corporate leaders, or there are just fewer and lines are shorter. But the Netherlands is a small, big country, with 17, nearly 18 million people. We have more inhabitants than all of Scandinavia, which means that and it's very dense. So we have all those people. We're one of the densest populated countries in the world, and especially in Europe. So everything is organized. And if you just fly over the Netherlands, it's amazing how everything seems to be planned, and it actually is, because we have parts of the country that are allowed to flood because we have the water issue, and then we have everything is zoned. And in such an organized structure, it becomes quite difficult to be flexible and to make policy, because you pull one string out of a system and then you don't know where the impact is going to happen in the rest of the system. Like take healthcare. We really want to innovate in healthcare, but the healthcare system is not a healthcare market. So, and if we treat it as a market, we want startups to grow and bring innovations to the market and grow internationally. But the healthcare system doesn't care about that. They want affordable care to everyone. And there's a fear that if you start plucking at the system, or you're putting innovation in the system, you're actually creating more friction. So the system as a whole becomes less efficient, even though you are bringing efficiency or a better customer value to one specific section of the system. So it's very resistant to that kind of change, and the vested interest will try to push out or keep out that kind of systems innovation. So that's our challenge. So in that sense, we are a big in terms of complexity, we are a relatively big country, and we don't have the luxury that you'd have in a Luxembourg or in I think Switzerland. Well, Switzerland, you also have this layered system of cantons, but where there's more direct government, and you can actually implement decisions quicker.
I had read something before I came over here, actually, where I guess the EU developed some sort of, they were allocating funds, essentially creating their own fund to invest in startups in Europe. And that is much different than sort of America, right? The government would never sort of make a fund and invest in startups. Just not how it works. It's just like the government is much separate than business, right? They don't kind of mingle together at all. But I thought it was an interesting idea, and I don't know your thoughts on it, where the government actually sets aside, capital and essentially taxpayers' money, but that invest in, local entrepreneurs, local startups, to kind of be there for them, right? Rather than being sort of a pain in their side a little bit, they're kind of allocating capital, which is obviously important. But I also imagine that it brings on other things as well of how to work with the government to implement your startup and scale successfully, maybe more efficiently than you would going against sort of, government policy. But I just thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah, actually, I was an advisor to that. We set it up. No, and I'm in two minds about these things. I think you really want to ensure that you crowd in commercial money, so private money.
Yeah,
and public money should not crowd out private money, because there's never enough there, and it's always more bureaucratic and is less professional. So when we set up this European fund, I said it should be the dumbest money allocated by the smartest people. Non-dilutive, money going in. But the moment that the government also wants kind of influence, in the governance of a company, then I think what you should, to understand what this is, you should look at two things. One is the kind of the Singaporean Israeli model, where public funding actually crowds in venture capital. For instance, I think in Singapore, for every dollar of venture capital, the government would put $5 of its public money in, to really attract the venture capital industry to Singapore. And it did an amazing job in that. And Israel as well has been attracting a lot of the big funds. And Israel is spending, I think, over $1 billion a year on innovation and especially tech transfer. So they've done that well. The other thing to understand is that this really is an extension of research funding. So And there, conceptually, that there might be some flaws in that, because typically government supports upstream research, which is fundamental, and there's no market. Yep. And then at a certain point, that research delivers something. It can be patent, and once it's a patent, then what do you do with it? You can license it to a government, but maybe it's too far from the market, and you still have to develop it. So you have to start a startup. Then what? Does the government then drop it or continue to fund it? And this handover between the market demand and the technology supply is really tricky. And the role of the government, and that we typically don't really construct the full bridge. We have this bridge in France. It's called there's even a song about it. It's called the bridge of d'Avignon, so the Pont d'Avignon. And the thing with this bridge is, I think it's a Roman bridge, but it doesn't have, the last part is lacking. So you have a big bridge, and you think you crossed the river, but the last part isn't there. So I always say, this is, for me, is the metaphor that you can keep pushing, from the research side, building this bridge. But as long as you don't get it to the other side where the market is and where things can actually grow, then, you maybe should save money and not spend too much on building a bridge that's not functional. And there's a bit of that. So to do it well is quite difficult. And as long as the government stays away from trying to become a venture capitalist, but actually crowds in venture capital and is very supportive of the entrepreneur and not of the technology, then I think it could work. And then what it does on the research side, that's a whole different story. But that may, that's open-ended research. It might not deliver any kind of functional technology in the end, but that's really where the government has a big role to play. And I mean, in the US, you have DARPA and others that are exemplary for us. We would all want to have a DARPA. I think that's been a very successful program.
Has there been any initial data that came back from it? Like how is sort of the fund interacting with startups already? Has it allocated capital or resources? Because I know it's fairly new, so I'm not sure if there's any initial feedback.
We had this SME fund before, which and I think it had only 7% of applications actually get funded, so it's pretty tough to get in. But then it's twice 7%. So if you actually received it, you can go for a second tier, and of all of the first tier, second is only 7% get a second investment. But that means that you can actually get something like 4 million in total of non-dilutive capital, which is really interesting. And then on top, you can then start getting also an equity investment with some guarantee of follow-on investment by the EIB. And there you have to start really thinking about if that's something for your company or not. And if you are a deep tech company where it's likely that you're dependent on public funding for a longer period of time, where you don't find venture capital yet, then this might be a very good instrument. Obviously, if you are building a SaaS solution or a fintech, you would not get that. You don't even want to go after that kind of money.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the startups coming out of the Netherlands. Van Mouth seems to be a really good beacon of what could happen here. I mean, I think they're expanding to the United States, across Europe. And then I'm a big Fairphone fan. I think what they're doing is also really, really incredible in the mobile phone space, which is a really hard place to get into, especially building hardware. Really, really interesting. But is there anybody else that you want to shout out or spotlight that is a really interesting company coming out of the Netherlands that has a chance to kind of really scale globally?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of companies in the whole lab meat space, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, we don't really know yet if labs meat can actually make it, given also its inherent footprint in chemicals and others. So you're reducing your dependency on livestock and surface. You gain a lot of surface, but on the other hand, there are other issues, and we don't really know how scalable it is. But if that works, then we have with Meatables and Moza Meat, we have a few companies that are really big in this space. So I find that, I would really buy into that once they can produce at industrial scale. Then there are a number of smaller companies like Leiden Jar, which is a battery company that has quite a revolutionary technology, which gives you a yield of more than 10 times a normal battery. So those kind of companies are exciting. At least the technology are exciting, but there's always the question, can a company like that actually develop a product that can be absorbed in the existing value chains?
Yeah.
The cars are being built around a certain design, and then you come with something new, and then it also has design implication and all that. So
Hmm.
I don't know how scalable it will be, but it's cool. Then there's another company, and they changed their name. They used to be called Spectrax, and they designed a chip for virus and bacteria identification, but instant. So actually, it works for COVID as well, but it's the price point is still a bit too high because you have a kind of a mobile device on which you put the chip, and the chip is, I think, 20 euros or 10 euros. And then the mobile device is which produced in Switzerland. It's something like 20,000 or 30,000 euros. That currently reduces its scalability, but
Yeah.
it means that you can basically test for all kinds of diseases at point. So
Interesting.
without having to wait for weeks and lab capability and stuff. And so also for pandemics in the future, it's a very flexible platform. It's non-chemistry based. It's based on optics technology, and so the latest chip technology. So I think that's really cool. And there are other, we have quite a lot of enthusiasm around optics, photonics, and with the growing shortage of chips and the whole developments
Yep.
in nanotechnology. I think that's an interesting space to look at. And then the health space is huge, but and we're going to focus on health because we see a lot of startups, but we don't see the kind of investments that you see in other places, and the health system itself is not really conducive to building big companies. So we see a lot of startups that are not scaling, and that's kind of an issue that we now want to dive in deeper.
What about fintech and maybe specifically crypto? How does, I guess, the Netherlands look at it, but you also the EU overall? And I guess I'm learning that like countries can act independently from the EU, but like they sort of maybe dictate overall policy for the entire union. What has been the thoughts, from policymakers that you talk to, or just entrepreneurs in general? Are there much more maybe entrepreneurs coming to the Netherlands to build maybe crypto startups or specifically blockchain startups?
Yeah.
And then maybe what's the overall thought from, again, policymakers and investors that you talk to here?
Yeah, it's a hard one. We have a lot of developers in the space, and some really cool initiatives like the Momentum Hackathon, which always brings in international teams to the Netherlands. It's now going completely virtual. So there's this enthusiasm around development, but then there is a lot of skepticism among our, say, the regulators, which
Sure.
apply kind of harsher norms of an AML and KYC than
Yeah.
is required in Europe, which is not that kind of drives out a lot of entrepreneurs that want to develop, because they will build their business in a place where the regulatory burden is the lowest,
Yep.
or at least will provide a reliable regulatory context in which you can develop your business. And
Sure.
if it's not reliable, they won't go, and if it's too harsh, they won't go. So and we are a bit on the harsh side. I think we're on the reliable side, but not on the hard. We're very hard. So it's probably easier to get a banking license in Latvia or Estonia or because that's in the European space. Otherwise, Switzerland maybe, or Luxembourg. That's a trouble. I think blockchain is a great technology which fits really well with the Dutch
Yeah.
in culture.
Yeah.
We're anti-authoritarian, and we like decentralization, and so basically everybody kind of building their own universe is something that goes down really well. But that's really the conceptual part, but building big businesses is another art form, and or another craft, which many people that are in this space don't care too much about. They care about doing stuff independently, building alternatives to our banking system. That's all really cool. But then to pull that through and become a really sustainable, big organization, that's different. So it's a long answer, but I think it is quite symptomatic for other spaces in the Netherlands, is that we love to start things, and we love to conceptualize, and we love to build, but then at a certain level we think, okay, it's okay, I'm not, this is no longer my thing to start, to build an organization, everything that comes with it.
Very difficult. I'd like to end on a little bit of the future and maybe what success looks like for you and maybe TechLeap, let's say 3 to 5 years or something what does success look like? Like what are maybe goals that you would like to see happen? Whether it's funded startups, whether it's the amount of capital allocated, whether it's companies that, IPO or something like that, or go international might be a good goal or something like that. What are some of the successes that you hope to see, through TechLeap and maybe through the fund that you help collaborate on?
Obviously, very visible outputs would be unicorns and companies going international and all that, and a massive increase of available funding. We said that we would increase it tenfold from the start, so we should be at in 2 years' time at 10 billion available capital or capital spent in the Netherlands on an annual basis. I think if the curve as it is going now, we actually can achieve that. But I think the true success would be to be able to establish a fully integrated ecosystem where we are no longer necessary, basically where people pay forward and give back, and where the people that exited or that have options that start reinvesting in new companies, and when that kind of flywheel starts to go, that's I think where real success is achieved, because then we're no longer necessary, and the government can actually pull back also from all of these big spending programs, because the market will start to function effectively. So that's one big success. And then more long term for the Netherlands is if we can actually apply this flywheel also to markets or sectors where we are traditionally very strong, but where we have not seen this. We haven't seen, for instance, in all of the horticulture, so food and ag, but also in health, in energy, we have not really seen that kind of venture-backed startup developments. We're seeing a lot of traditional companies doing a lot of innovation, but they're not as disruptive as they could be. And if you see the amount of technology that's developed, for instance, in the Dutch food sector, especially in horticulture, that is only used to incrementally improve the yield on, say, tomatoes or other products. Right. But it's not, the technology in itself is not marketed globally as a tech firm. So we keep putting all that innovation into incremental changes, whereas we could actually use that to be much bigger. So that my success would be if we could actually bring kind of startup logic and venture capital to these very hard to reach sectors.
Interesting.
For long term.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much.